1 minute, stop. If she's secretly in love with you, she will never say it out loud. She'll smile, but you'll be the reason. She'll act normal while her world quietly starts revolving around you. And the most dangerous part? You'll think nothing is happening, when in reality, everything already is. There's a strange moment in human connection that most people miss, the moment when feelings exist but haven't yet been admitted, not even to oneself. It's subtle, quiet, almost invisible. And yet, if you know where to look, it reveals everything. Attraction isn't always loud or obvious. In fact, the most powerful kind often hides beneath controlled words and composed behavior, surfacing only through cracks in the subconscious. When a woman secretly develops feelings for you, her emotions begin to shift in ways she may not fully understand. You might notice that her reactions feel slightly more intense than they should be. A delayed reply from you might change her mood more than expected. A small compliment from you might stay with her longer than it logically should. This isn't randomness. It's emotional investment forming beneath the surface. Her mind is starting to assign value to your presence, and once that happens, even the smallest interactions carry weight. She may not admit it, but internally, your actions are no longer neutral. They matter. And when something matters, emotions follow, often before awareness catches up. At the same time, something else begins to happen quietly. She starts noticing you in ways that go beyond casual attention. You'll find her remembering things you barely recall mentioning, your preferences, your opinions, the way you reacted to something trivial days ago. This isn't just good memory. It's selective attention driven by subconscious prioritization. The human mind doesn't invest energy into remembering details unless it has decided that the source of those details is important. And the interesting part is, she may still act as if nothing has changed. On the outside, she appears normal, unaffected. But internally, her mind has already begun cataloging you as someone significant. Then comes the contradiction, the silent conflict between what is said and what is revealed. Words are controlled. They are filtered, calculated, and often used as protection. But the body doesn't operate the same way. It leaks truth. You might hear her speak in a neutral or even distant tone, but her body tells a different story. The way she leans slightly closer without realizing it, the way her eyes linger just a moment longer than necessary, the subtle mirroring of your movements, these are not conscious decisions. They are automatic responses rooted in attraction. And this is where things become fascinating. Because when someone is hiding their feelings, the gap between their words and their body language becomes wider. The more she tries to appear unaffected, the more her subconscious tries to express what she won't say. You may also start noticing patterns that feel like coincidence, but happen too often to be random. You run into her more frequently. You find yourselves in the same places at the same times, without planning it. Conversations seem to just happen. But human behavior is rarely accidental. When someone is drawn to you but unwilling to admit it, their mind finds ways to create proximity without exposing intention. It feels safer that way. If it's labeled as coincidence, there's no risk of rejection, no vulnerability on display. Yet beneath that surface, there's a quiet pull guiding her actions, bringing her closer while maintaining the illusion that nothing is deliberate. And then there are the tests, the moments that seem casual on the surface but carry deeper meaning underneath. She might say something ambiguous, something that feels like a joke or a passing comment, but it lingers. She might bring up a hypothetical situation, ask a question that seems random, or tease you in a way that invites a reaction. These are not meaningless interactions. They are psychological probes. She's trying to understand you without directly asking. She's measuring your awareness, your emotional depth, your ability to read between the lines. Because revealing feelings directly requires vulnerability, and vulnerability carries risk. So instead she tests. She observes how you respond, how you interpret, how you engage. And through those responses, she builds a clearer picture of whether it's safe to let her guard down. But perhaps the most telling sign is the way she allows herself to be vulnerable, just enough to be felt, but not enough to feel exposed. You might notice moments where she opens up, where she reveals something slightly deeper than usual, a thought, a feeling, a piece of her inner world. And just as quickly as it appears, it's pulled back. This push and pull isn't confusion, it's internal conflict. Part of her wants to be seen by you, understood by you, but another part is cautious, protective, unwilling to risk too much too soon. So she gives you glimpses instead of the full picture. And those glimpses are intentional, even if they don't seem that way. All of this creates a dynamic that feels complex, almost mysterious. Because you're not just interacting with her words, you're interacting with her subconscious. And the subconscious doesn't communicate directly. It speaks through patterns, through behavior, through inconsistencies that only make sense when you look deeper. What makes this even more interesting is that most people completely miss it. They focus only on what is said, ignoring everything that is shown. They look for direct signals, clear statements, obvious signs, but hidden attraction doesn't work that way. It exists in the space between actions and words, in the subtle shifts that are easy to overlook but impossible to fake. Understanding this isn't about manipulation or overanalyzing every detail. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing that human behavior is layered, that people often feel things long before they're ready to admit them. And when you start to see those layers, your perspective changes. You stop chasing obvious answers and start observing deeper patterns. Because the truth is, people rarely hide feelings perfectly. They just hide them well enough for those who aren't paying attention. And those who are, see everything. It's often not the loud moments that reveal the truth about human connection, but the quiet ones that seem almost insignificant at first. A passing comment remembered days later. A detail you mentioned once, brought back unexpectedly. These are the moments where attraction stops being surface level and begins to settle deeper into the subconscious. Because when a woman is secretly drawn to you, her attention doesn't just pass over you, it stays, it lingers, and more importantly, it organizes itself around you. The human mind is selective by nature. Every day, we are exposed to thousands of pieces of information, and yet we remember only a fraction. What gets remembered isn't random. It's chosen based on emotional relevance. So when she starts recalling things about you that even you don't consider important, it's not just attentiveness. It's prioritization. Her mind has quietly decided that you matter. And once that decision is made, it begins collecting pieces of you, your preferences, your habits, your opinions, almost like building a psychological profile without conscious effort. What makes this even more intriguing is that she may not openly express this awareness. She won't announce that she's paying attention. In fact, she may go out of her way to appear casual, even indifferent at times. But then, unexpectedly, she'll reference something you said days ago. Something small. Something you assumed was forgotten the moment it was spoken. And in that moment, there's a subtle shift. Because now you realize she's been listening more closely than she lets on. This behavior is deeply rooted in how attraction works on a subconscious level. When someone becomes significant to us, our brain starts filtering information differently. It begins to highlight anything related to that person, storing it with more clarity and detail. This isn't a conscious decision, it's automatic. It's the mind's way of saying, this person is important. Pay attention. And once that switch is flipped, even the smallest interactions gain meaning. You might notice that she remembers your preferences without being reminded. The way you like your coffee, the kind of music you mentioned once, the opinion you casually shared in a conversation that seemed unimportant at the time. These details resurface naturally in later interactions, almost as if she's been keeping track without trying. And the truth is, she hasn't been trying. Her mind has been doing it for her. But here's where it becomes even more layered. This kind of attention often exists alongside a deliberate attempt to hide its intensity. She doesn't want it to seem like she's watching you too closely, because that would reveal interest. And revealing interest creates vulnerability. So instead, she balances it. She remembers, but she reveals that memory in controlled moments. Just enough to show awareness, but not enough to expose how deep that awareness actually goes. This creates a subtle tension in the interaction. On one hand, her behavior suggests a level of interest that goes beyond casual. On the other hand, her demeanor may still appear composed, neutral, even slightly distant at times. And it's this contrast that makes hidden attraction so difficult to read unless you know what you're looking for. Because real attention doesn't lie. It doesn't accidentally focus on one person repeatedly without reason. When someone consistently remembers you, notices you, and recalls details about you, it's a reflection of where their mental energy is going. And mental energy is one of the most honest indicators of emotional interest. There's also a deeper psychological layer to this. When she starts remembering details about you, she's not just observing, she's connecting. Each piece of information becomes part of a larger picture she's forming about who you are. And this process creates familiarity. It creates a sense of knowing you, even if your interactions are still relatively limited. And familiarity over time builds comfort. It lowers defenses. It makes emotional closeness feel more natural, even if it hasn't been openly acknowledged. But because this entire process is happening beneath the surface, it often goes unnoticed or misunderstood. You might interpret it as friendliness, as politeness, or simply as a good memory. And while it can be those things, the difference lies in consistency and depth. Casual attention is scattered. It comes and goes. But when attraction is involved, attention becomes focused. It returns to you repeatedly, without effort, without intention, as if pulled by something deeper. And the most interesting part is she may not even realize the full extent of it herself. She just knows that she remembers you, that things about you stay with her longer than expected, that conversations with you feel slightly more meaningful, even when they're simple. And that subtle difference is where everything begins. Because attraction doesn't always start with grand gestures or obvious signs. Sometimes it begins with attention. Quiet, consistent, unspoken attention that slowly builds into something more. And if you learn to recognize that, you start to see what others completely miss. There's a point in every hidden attraction where words begin to lose their reliability, not because they're meaningless, but because they're controlled, carefully chosen, filtered through awareness, fear, and the need to maintain composure. But while words can be managed, the body operates on a completely different system, one that doesn't ask for permission before revealing what's really going on beneath the surface. When a woman is secretly attracted to you, this is where the real story begins to unfold. Not in what she says, but in what she unintentionally shows. Because the subconscious mind doesn't communicate in sentences. It communicates in signals, small, almost invisible behaviors that, when you start connecting them, form a pattern that's impossible to ignore. You might notice that her tone stays neutral, her words measured, even slightly distant at times. She might respond in a way that gives nothing away, keeping the interaction safe, controlled, and emotionally balanced on the surface. But then something doesn't quite match. Her body leans in just a little when you speak, even if her words remain casual. Her eye contact lingers a fraction longer than necessary, then quickly pulls away as if she caught herself. These are not rehearsed actions. They're automatic responses driven by internal interest. This contradiction between controlled speech and uncontrolled behavior is where hidden attraction becomes visible. Because the more someone tries to maintain emotional neutrality, the more their subconscious looks for ways to express what's being held back. It's like pressure building behind a wall. Eventually, it finds small cracks to escape through. One of the most telling signs is mirroring. Without realizing it, she may begin to reflect your movements, your posture, even your rhythm of speech. If you lean back, she might do the same moments later. If you lower your voice, hers may subtly follow. This isn't imitation, it's connection. The brain does this when it feels aligned with someone, when it's trying to create a sense of synchronization. And the key detail here is that it happens unconsciously. She's not deciding to mirror you. Her mind is doing it for her. Then there are micro-expressions, the brief, almost imperceptible flashes of emotion that appear before they can be hidden. A quick smile that shows up and disappears just as fast. A slight softening in her eyes when she looks at you, followed by a return to composure. These moments are easy to miss if you're not paying attention, but they're incredibly honest. Because they exist in that tiny gap between feeling and control. Physical orientation also reveals more than most people realize. Even in a group setting, her body may subtly angle toward you. Her feet, her shoulders, the direction she faces, it all tends to align in your direction, even if she's engaged in conversation with others. This is the body's way of signaling focus and interest without needing words. And the fascinating part is, she may not even be aware she's doing it. What makes all of this even more complex is that these signals often appear alongside behavior that seems to contradict them. She might create distance verbally, downplay interactions, or act as if everything is purely casual. And this is where many people get confused. They take the words at face value and ignore the nonverbal cues. But when there's a mismatch, the subconscious is usually the more honest source. Because maintaining emotional control requires effort. It requires awareness, intention, and constant adjustment. But the body doesn't operate under those same constraints. It reacts in real time, based on what is actually being felt. And when someone is trying to hide their feelings, that gap between control and reaction becomes more noticeable. You might also notice moments where she seems slightly off balance around you, not in an obvious way, but in subtle shifts. A pause that's a bit longer than usual. A response that feels slightly delayed, as if she's thinking about how to respond rather than just responding naturally. These are small disruptions in her normal flow, caused by the internal effort to manage what she's feeling while still appearing composed. And this is where understanding human behavior requires a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing only on what is being said, you start observing how it's being said. The pauses, the tone, the alignment between words and actions, or the lack of it. Because hidden attraction rarely presents itself in a straightforward way. It exists in contradictions, in inconsistencies that only make sense when you look beneath the surface. The truth is, people can control their words almost perfectly if they choose to. They can say the right things, maintain distance, and create the impression that nothing is there. But controlling the body completely is much harder. It requires a level of awareness that most people simply don't have in real-time interactions. So when you begin to notice these subtle signals, the lingering eye contact, the unconscious mirroring, the slight lean, the micro-expressions, you're not just observing random behavior. You're seeing the subconscious at work. You're seeing what she feels, not what she's trying to present. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because now you're no longer limited to surface-level communication. You're reading the deeper language, the one that doesn't need words to be understood. And that's where the real truth always reveals itself. Some connections don't announce themselves. They quietly arrange themselves. You don't notice it at first. It feels natural, unforced, almost coincidental. You run into her more often than expected. Conversations seem to happen without planning. Situations align in a way that feels just a little too consistent to be random. And the instinct is to dismiss it as chance. But human behavior rarely operates on pure coincidence, especially when emotion is involved. When a woman is secretly attracted to you, her mind begins to solve a very specific problem: how to be around you without exposing why. Because direct pursuit carries risk. It requires clarity, and clarity demands vulnerability. So instead, the subconscious chooses a safer route. It creates proximity while maintaining plausible deniability. It allows her to be near you, interact with you, and experience your presence, all under the disguise of circumstance. You might start noticing patterns. She appears in places where you are, not in an obvious or forced way, but just enough to feel frequent. Timing begins to overlap. You arrive, and somehow she's already there, or shows up shortly after. Conversations begin with something small, something casual, as if they just happened to start. But when these moments repeat, they stop being random. They become intentional, even if that intention isn't fully conscious. This is where the mind's ability to influence behavior without direct awareness becomes fascinating. She may not be thinking, "I'm going there to see him." Instead, her decisions feel justified by other reasons: routine, convenience, habit. But beneath those surface explanations, there's a quiet pull guiding her choices, a preference forming around your presence. And over time, that preference shapes her environment in subtle ways. What makes this dynamic so effective is that it protects her from rejection. If an interaction is framed as accidental, there's no emotional risk attached to it. If the conversation doesn't go anywhere, it can simply be dismissed as a moment that happened, nothing more. But if it does go somewhere, if there's connection, engagement, or a spark, then it builds naturally, without the pressure of expectation. You might also notice that these interactions often start in low-stakes ways. A quick comment, a simple question, a brief exchange that doesn't demand much. This isn't hesitation, it's strategy, even if it's not consciously planned. Small interactions create familiarity. Familiarity creates comfort, and comfort slowly lowers the barrier between two people, making deeper connection feel less risky over time. But here's where it becomes even more interesting. While she's creating these opportunities for proximity, she may still maintain a level of emotional distance in how she's present.